on Facebook, you can get plugged into that. um, but yeah, thank you guys again for showing up here. Thank you to Leah for having us, and to everybody here, all the people who have been here, to Vinny for the support, and everybody who made the trip to come out. As I mentioned before, we have free stuff from our sponsors in the tour. We've got zines that are basically individual printed chapters from each of me and John Vibe's books. All three of our books are here. The presentation tonight is going to be focused on the third book called Manifesto of the Free Humans. That's the majority of what we're going to be talking about. Will come from there. And the tour, being called Decentralize Your Life, is obviously focused on that, decentralizing, unplugging, opting out from various systems, centralized systems, be those corporate systems, state power, and trying to localize, in effect, bringing back control, resources, power back to our neighborhoods, back to the community level, and trying to create parallel institutions that can actually compete directly with the institutions that don't represent what we want to see in the world. So we're going to discuss all that. We're going to break that down piece by piece. I'm going to try to go through this and talk to you guys about what me and John have been referring to as holistic activism or holistic anarchism, and you're going to cover a lot of different concepts. But before we get into that, I'd like to first, really illustrate to everyone, just share a bit of my background. For I think mostly everyone here is somewhat familiar with my work, but for those who are not, I'll tell you about what I'm doing now, and then I'd like to kind of take a few steps backwards and maybe help you understand why we include meditation. Sometimes people come to these events, or they know of my work, whether it's my journalism or my activism or the philosophical stuff, and like, well, why am I meditating? I came here to hear about anarchy, or I came here to hear about solutions or whatnot. But those are one of the solutions that we're putting forward, and hopefully by the end of this talk you'll understand how the deeper introspection, self-reflection, things like meditation, nonviolent communication, psychedelic therapy, a good conversation with another human being, these things are all helpful for developing ourselves and different things with different people, and that's intrinsic to what we're talking about. So my name is Derrick Broze. I'm 32 years old. I'm a freelance investigative journalist. I write for the Anti-Media, Activist Post, Mid-Press News. I have a radio show in Houston. I live in the Freethinker House, which is the headquarters, the freedom hub for the Houston Freethinkers, which is an activist community I started in 2010. And over the last 7 years, I've worked with hundreds of different activists, both locally and then meeting other activists from around the country, working digitally as well as face-to-face more and more. And we've been, in Houston, we've been able to, we did all the protesting things in the beginning. We launched before the Occupy movement, so we worked a lot with Occupy Houston. We did some big marches. We did all the street action, civil disobedience, getting arrested, playing with the cops, all that fun stuff. Been through that. And, we've also been able to raise thousands of dollars for various organizations, whether it's, Food Not Bombs, helping out the homeless, or survivors of human trafficking, or anti-war stuff, or anti-drug war stuff. Just different issues, different causes. We've been able to, with my journalism and with our activism, help expose the Houston Police Department's use of stingray surveillance. We've become the only city in the country to successfully kick the TSA off of our Houston bus line, where they basically launched a program in 2012 telling people that if they chose to ride the bus, they would be subject to random searches and bags, searches and drug-sniffing dogs and all these kind of things. And we were able to rally up and kick them out of our city within 2 weeks. And a lot of different things that we're very excited and thankful for and proud of, and that I'm thankful for. And this is, as I said, I live in the Freethinker House. This is the third version of our community space that we use to do these things. We've hosted hundreds of documentaries over the years and gone out and do what we call info jams, just going out to big events, festivals and whatnot, passing out flyers, talking to people, just lots of outreach. And all these beautiful things that I'm just so humbled and blessed to be a part of. And now I'm getting to do this national tour, this Decentralize Your Life tour. I didn't go to school for journalism. I just learned along the way, just came through activism, and then I've taken journalism classes sort of on the side since then. But it's all just developed and it's been a very wonderful experience. And so those are a lot of the things I'm involved in now and what I'm doing these days. But as I said, I'd like to share a little bit more about how I got to this point, because that's all like activism and political stuff, right? When people talk about, my awakening, or I woke up and this kind of thing, generally for the most part they're speaking of like they woke up to politics and like they found out what's really going on in the world. You start questioning health and history and the media and government, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, I've been lied to about so many different things. So that really did start for me 2009, 2010. But honestly, I feel like my personal, awakening, the shift, however you want to think about it, it was actually it started a little bit earlier for me. And 12 years ago, 2005, November 2005, I was arrested for possession of a controlled substance, and I was sentenced to 2 years felony probation and 11 months in the Texas State Prison. And I'd been addicted to crystal meth for about 11 months before that, leading up to getting arrested. And so, when that experience happened, whenever I found myself behind bars, if anybody's ever been in that situation, whether it's 12 hours or 12 months, you understand it's a very humbling situation where you find yourself powerless. You recognize that, okay, no matter who I call or cry to, my mom, my dad, my family, my friends, my girlfriend, my lawyer, nobody can do anything. I'm here. I'm stuck. I'm at the mercy of these people. And it's like I said, it's a very humbling experience. You recognize you're powerless. I found myself in that situation and really started to do some of that self-reflection and to ask myself how I got myself in that position. I tried crystal meth for the first time in January 2005. Up until that time, I had a nice job going, had an apartment, had a relationship, and was just trying to get my shit together. I was 20 years old. I got arrested the week before I turned 21 in November. So I was just getting my stuff together and started hanging around some old friends who I hadn't seen in quite some time. They were getting into harder drugs, and all I really knew was like, okay, this stuff's gonna make me stay awake for a while or whatever. And, so I kind of naively just dove in, and the next morning I'm like, here's $200, give me some more, give me as much as you can. And that just kind of began this cycle of getting hooked on it, losing my job because I was losing so much weight I couldn't carry the boxes and things that I was doing at the time. So then they were like, hey, don't worry, we'll just move in with you, we'll all sell drugs together. I'm like, okay, I guess that sounds like a good idea. So, as you can imagine, when you put a bunch of people in a small space with lots of drugs and people on drugs and selling drugs, things get chaotic. And I ended up getting evicted, ended up living on the street for quite a while, and at that time really kind of getting taken under the wing of some older drug dealers and, for lack of a better term, career criminals, people who really had no interest in doing anything other than what they've been doing. And to them, going to prison or getting locked up was just kind of a consequence of their lifestyle. It was an acceptable consequence. They're like, okay, well, I get locked up, I get back out, and maybe they'll get me again, but that's just what they did. And so I was just going down this really dark path, and adding the drugs to it didn't really make things easier to deal with in the process. But I ended up, just going further and further until I ended up getting locked up. And when I got locked up, I really clearly remember seeing this like a vision almost of these two paths presented before me. And one of them was a path that was very familiar. And this is the path that, I found myself like, okay, shit, here I am getting arrested for drugs. I'd never really been in too much major trouble before, but I figured I was probably screwed. I'm like, okay, this is, they're not just gonna let me go home today, I don't think. I looked at this path and was like, I understand what this is about. In my family, the Broze family, specifically the men of the Broze family, at least the 3 generations going back, there's a very strong history of drug abuse and alcohol abuse in prison. My great-grandfather hung himself in prison. He'd abused my grandfather, who abused my father, and really messed him up emotionally and physically, and got him using drugs when he was 9 or 10 years old. And of my 32 years, he's been locked up for 30 years of my life, off and on. He's never been free for more than a short period of time, battling his own emotional demons, his own drug addiction, and his own trauma. And some of my earliest memories are going to visit him in prison, being 5, 6 years old, and going to this giant place, razor wire, the guards are telling my mom her shirt's too revealing, gotta go back to the car and change. Just all these sort of things, like as a little kid trying to take this all in, like why do I have to go to this place to visit this guy? I don't even know if we really understand as a kid, like the terms father and mother, but we understand like connection, love, and that sort of thing. And so I understood somebody that was supposed to mean something to me was behind this giant wall and razor wire and things, and we had to go through this whole process, and it's like questions like, how come we only get to see him for an hour? And why does he have a black eye? And why are they taking him away? And he would, I just had to try to integrate those experiences as a very young kid, and also the experiences of being told certain promises, like I'll be home for the next birthday, I'm going to be here for this next ball game, or what have you, and him being unable to, because of his own trauma and his own pain, I understand now, to fulfill those promises. And again, as a young child, trying to understand, like, okay, so I guess adults just say whatever the hell they want, and they make stuff up and they don't do it. And taking that in as a young kid, I started to become not only mistrusting of pretty much everybody, myself as well, but also I put a lot of weight and a lot of negativity on myself. And much of my earliest memories are of thoughts and memories that people would generally consider to be suicidal. And I attempted to kill myself 3 times between the age of 10 and 18. And I just have these very, like, as I got locked up and started to realize, like, okay, do I want to go down this path or I want to try something different? I was like, I'm going to make the most out of this time. I started just writing and journaling every single day in there and trying to figure out, okay, well, how did I get hooked on this stuff? And how did I get in this path? And, to the point where people are getting shot outside the apartments we're at, and I'm living in a crack and meth house, and just trying to reflect, like, what brought me to this place. And as I started to look at these things, I could see that there were obviously deeper, root causes to where my pain was coming from. What drove me to go want to try crystal? And before that, it was, being on Xanax for 6 months, and before that, it was being on ecstasy for 6 months until I became a zombie. And before that, it was, being the guy that was puking in the corner after taking 20 beer bongs or 20 shots. I was the train wreck at every party. So it was just a cycle that had been taking place for me. Once I got out of high school, I just dove in and just like a couple of years until eventually I tried crystal, and it really grabbed me, and then I ended up getting locked up. So when I was in that situation, like I said, I decided I don't want to go down that path. I know what that looks like. Let me try to get something more out of this and try to use this time for something. And I just really started doing that self-reflection, and a lot of these memories, I don't know if you would say they were repressed or just I hadn't taken the time to really look at them yet, but a lot of these memories started to come back to me, and I spent some time, writing to my birth father. He was, the sort of ironic thing, and also to me it was kind of like a kick in the chest, because I spent a lot of my time being angry at this dude for, his absence and for his problem. Like, why can't you get your shit together? And then I find myself getting arrested for drugs, and I'm at one institution and he's at another institution, like at the same time. I was like, oh, well, this sucks. This is not a good feeling. And I started to just dive deep and ask all these questions. And while I was locked up in there, in Houston, they have the Houston Chronicle on the Saturday section. There's a religion section, and they always quote like the Torah, the Quran, the Bible. And this section I saw, they had a quote from the Dhammapada, which is sometimes known as the Buddhist Bible. And it was just a verse that struck me very deeply. And every time I tell this story, I wish I could tell you guys, I could come out with this really profound thing, but I don't remember what it was. It's just something like, whatever it was one of the verses in there. They're all great. Something that just really struck me deeply, and immediately I started writing to my grandmother and to friends and family. Can you send me anything you can on meditation and Buddhism and stuff? So I started getting sent chapter by chapter of Dhammapada. I got a book on Zen Buddhism and meditation, and I started meditating when I was locked up. That was the first place that I really chose to try to figure out, okay, what's this all about? I'd already kind of been familiar with what meditation was, somewhat, but I hadn't really ever took it seriously, and I had all sorts of time in there to really try to focus on going within. And I honestly think it was probably the best place to do that, because prisons, jails, these state institutions, they're filled with a lot of fear, obviously, because people don't know, it's like kind of a traumatizing experience. But there's also a lot of ego, there's a lot of racism, it's a lot of just what I consider low level, low vibration, primitive thinking, that humans in this situation, we just flock to what's familiar and what's comfortable, what feels safe, And so it's like a whole different ecosystem. People telling me I couldn't talk to this person, or I couldn't do this, and I had to just, in that environment, learn to go within. And I remember just being on my bunk and starting to get into meditation, and kind of could hear the guys over here whispering, "What the fuck is that big dude on his bed? What is that guy up to?" I'm just sitting there in like lotus position, just trying to get zen and like don't worry about what people are talking about, because it was for me. It wasn't about them, And it was through those experiences that I really did start to look back, and as I said, I had some very early memories of just being so hard on myself. There was the suicide attempts. I was pretty much depressed. Like, the various earliest memories of mine were being depressed. A lot of it now I can see very clearly associated with this relationship. And it was letters of, "I'll be there soon. I'll be there. I promise I'll be for this thing." And after a while, my family was like, "We're not taking you kids to see him anymore in prison. If he wants to come out and communicate with you guys, that's on y'all." When I turned 14, he got released for Christmas, and it was supposed to be a big deal. Like, he was going to be there for Christmas. That hadn't happened my entire life, and so it was like everybody was making a big deal. Christmas Eve, we go to my grandmother's, and right away I could tell something didn't feel right. I walk in, start going over to the bathroom down the hallway, and I hear my grandmother telling my mom, like, he's already on the way back. They already caught him. Like, I've never seen anybody get caught so many times in my life, and I don't know if he's just institutionalized at this point. I think that's definitely a part of it. But he was on the way back, and I remember, and I'm 14 at this time, I remember going into the bathroom and just taking that in and just crying my eyes out, and then looking in the mirror and just being like, fuck this, I'm never going to let anybody hurt me again. And from that time, from 14 till pretty much when I got locked up, like, I put this shell around myself. It's like people talk about Star Wars and the dark side, right? We think this anger is empowering to us. I mean, anger can make you feel strong, because you can kind of push things off and block the pain that you're usually masking, or the fear that you're masking, and it feels like you're being empowered, but really it's just covering up weaknesses. And so I started to just project outwards. I was the dude who was always talking shit about everything, everyone. I had something to make fun of this or that, or just projecting outwards. Don't look at me. Don't look at what I'm experiencing here. And also for me, I don't want to look inside what's happening here. Let me just focus outwardly. And I also really enjoyed at the time, or I believed I did, this concept of misanthropy. That word literally, just to be a misanthrope is just somebody who hates humans, hates humanity. It's just like, so I was like at the time like, yeah, fuck it all. Very nihilistic way of living. And in school, and at that time I was in advanced classes. I graduated high school a semester early, but nobody knew any of that stuff for me. They knew that I was the kid that was getting in fights, getting arrested, throwing chairs at teachers, and just generally causing havoc. And then when I got out of high school, I started experimenting. That's when I said I got into alcohol. I got into it just was hopping from one thing to the next, because I started to feel like, oh wow, whenever I'm like the drug guy, I feel like really good. This is like a good feeling, something I haven't really quite experienced much in my life. And also, I think I was kind of feeding off the attention of being the kind of clown at the party. I was like, okay, maybe I look like a fool or I'm acting all silly, but people seem to be paying attention to me, right? So looking back now, a lot of these things are more clear to me than obviously they were at the time. At the time, I'm just like, oh, I'm having fun. I'm just getting wasted, it's a good time. And eventually it led to crystal, and that led to me getting locked up and discovering meditation and getting to these things. But I'm a slow learner, so after the first time, after 11 months, I got out, and I only lasted about 5 months because I came back out. And one of the things they say in recovery is about changing your people, places, and things. And I think that is important. As cliche as a lot of those things are, I definitely think that's valuable advice. To you can't really expect to just go back to the crack house or go back to these experiences with people and not get back involved in that. Or it's very difficult. Some people are able to do it, but it is difficult. And I got out, and I saw some old friends who were like, hey man, I know you just got out, I want to help you out, let me give you a pound of weed, help you make some money. And I'm really trying to stay clean this time, trying to stay out of trouble. I need to stay out of this stuff. He's like, let me give you 2 pounds, all right? Let's go make yourself some money. Again, man, I appreciate it. I know that, because again, at that time, this is how, for me, what my awareness was, this is the way people showed appreciation and love and thanks and care. They gave you drugs, or they gave you things like that. The people that had gotten taken under their wings, they'd be like, hey man, here's a couple of lines of this, or here's some of this, eat this pill, take this. Like, and I'm like, man, these guys are really cool. They care about me, and had some really interesting, almost kind of twisted father-son relationship with some of these people, because it was the way they were able to express at the time, like, I care about you, here's this, go make yourself some money. And so, I was still around that. By the time this dude's offering me 4 pounds of weed, I'm loading the car up, like, all right, well, I guess I'll take all that. It's kind of hard to turn down that after so many requests for giving you pounds of cannabis. Or at least it was for me at that time. But you can only really be around that much weed for so long before you end up smoking some of it. So sure enough, after about 5 months, I pissed dirty, and they sent me back for another 3 months. And at that point, it was really like another gut check, because the lady I was dating at the time left me, basically like, I can't do this again. My family's like, you're turning into your father, don't talk to us. Like, I had to go I just basically really feel like I hit bottom then. I had to go turn myself in, downtown, and just like, okay, like, this is it. I'm going in alone. Like, nobody's on my side, nobody's waiting. But I think that's really what I needed, And I do want to add this caveat that prison and none of these institutions are what helped me. It was a personal choice that I made, because there's people that I met in there, some of the most brilliant people. People will tell you this. There's so many brilliant people within prisons and within these institutions, unfortunately, and that's a product of how big our prison industrial system has become in this country. Like, so many people are locked up for so many mundane things, but those places are not designed to create change, to create healthy change, to put out positive, productive adults. Their goal is to just get you back out there in this little world, paying taxes, working within their system, what they believe is a healthy way of living, right? But those institutions are not designed to do that. It's got to come from within, because I met good people in there who I was locked up with. Some of them got it before I did. They did their little stint and they never went back. They never looked back. There's other people that I locked up with that they're dead now, and there's other people that I know that are still cycling in and out. So it's a personal choice, and it doesn't always happen for everybody. So I feel very thankful that, at the time I had ability to just get myself sober, because I got sober before I got locked up. I really had some interesting experiences, and that's a whole nother. We spend hours talking about that, but it was a decision I had to make. Basically, is my point. So when it was all said and done, between November 2005 and October 2008, when I finally got out for the last time, I'd done 18 months in Texas state institutions, and was released for the final time as a felon, October 2008, a very interesting time to be coming back into the free world, as they call it in there, because if you remember, that was about a month before Obama got elected. And, I was somewhat politically aware at that time. Like, at the end of high school, I had like an anti-Bush band, we were like anti-war and stuff. But then the only time I've ever done any sort of political participation, voting, I was 18 years old. What did I go do? I went and voted for the other guy, John Kerry, because I was convinced. Surely the other team must have been better, right? Later on, I found out they were cousins, and that was really confusing. But that was the only time I ever participated in that political system. So I wasn't, totally aware of what was going on at the time. But I'm coming out in October 2008, and there's, the presidential elections coming up. And at that time, at least from my perception, people were acting like this Obama dude was either going to be the savior of the world or the Antichrist. Like, what the heck is going on? So I started kind of paying a little bit more attention. I got out, and as a felon, I happened to be living next to a library, and I started going to the library every day just applying for jobs. And it's really interesting for me to reflect on those experiences, because the life that I've carved out for myself now, being able to do these beautiful experiences and write journalism, like when somebody wants me to write an article for them, they don't typically ask to see my rap sheet to see if I have a record or anything. They judge me based on the character of who I am now. We get to know each other. They judge me as a person, not of like, oh, you have this thing that attached to your name. So it's so foreign to me now, but at that time it was very prominent, getting turned down from jobs all the time, and people looking at you a certain way. And even now, if I was to try to go back into that mainstream world and, like, say, go back to being a cook or being at restaurants, they would be like, wow, you have no work history for 7 years of, wherever you've been. Oh, and you got a felony? But it's just something that's so foreign to me now. But I started going to apply for these jobs and was at the library all the time. And in this process of getting into meditation, self-reflection, I really felt like a cloud was lifting off to me. That's just the only way I can describe it, because not only was the heaviness from the depression and the suicide that I've been dealing with, suicide attempts I've been dealing with a lot of my life, was starting to lift, and I started to unlearn a lot of negative behavior, negative self-talk, and unhealthy actions, and then relearn new things. So I was treating myself better, I was starting to eat better, I was stopping, just a lot of destructive behaviors, and just felt like, wow, like optimistic. And some of those old friends, as I was phasing out of being around them and going into this path I'm on now, there's some memories of them being like, man, I'm really getting sick of your optimism. Like, you're just so happy these days. Because we were just totally on different vibrations after that. Before we could sit around and get high and talk shit about the world and, be cool and comfortable in our misery together. But now that I was like, man, it's a freaking awesome day today. I think I want to go out and go ride my bike or just go on a run. They're like, what are you talking about? Are you high? Like, no, actually I'm not. I just kind of feel good today, and I started just enjoying life. And so it was it's like this cloud was lifting, and I could see that I was separating from these people I've been contacted with. And along with this cloud lifting, the elevation of emotional state, I also remembered, like, wow, I'm an intelligent person. I love to read, I love to learn, and to research and to understand the world. And so from that library, I just started checking out books. And one of the first books that I really credit to helping me look at the world with new eyes was a book called Cannabis: A History. And it's all about, really great book. It's all about the history of cannabis, like sociological impact, the laws, and it talks about the origin of the drug laws in this country, the Harrison Drug Act of 1914, and how, like much of the drug war, but definitely with cannabis, it was based on money, like pushing the hemp industry out, and racism, like pushing this racist propaganda against black jazz musicians, Chinese migrant workers, Mexican migrant workers, like they're gonna come take all the white women and all this bullshit, and got these laws put into place. And so as somebody who was just getting out of prison after experiencing, being a part of the drug war, some people call it, like, I'm a refugee from the drug war or something, I'm a survivor of the drug war, right? But getting out from that, it was very interesting to me. It's like, whoa, I don't think this is the version of history that I was ever told how this stuff happened. And it really just added to my knowledge. And that was the beginning of just kind of diving down the rabbit hole. And then there's a few other books that I read, and then some documentaries I watched. And from then it was, 2009, it was just, that's when I had that other awakening, talking about the political awakening. And then the next year I started the Freethinkers. So now you kind of see how, for me, that journey, before I ever got into activism, before I ever started going out in the street and talking to people and like questioning, the government and questioning corporate power and trying to look at all these institutions, I was already having this deeper spiritual revelation that for me came from self-reflection, it came through meditation, and it came from simply just trying to get to know myself on a deeper level, to forgive myself in a lot of ways for some of the because in my own pain, I also caused, been very self-destructive and caused pain to other people, and I had to do a lot of self-forgiveness, and the process is ongoing, like I think it is for many of us. But, so that experience came before I ever got into activism, and all these things have come along the way. And once I got into activism, though, and I started to question these things, started the Freethinkers, at that time I had my activist friends, we would go to protests, and we would have meetings and rallies and all that kind of stuff. And then I had my meditation kind of consciousness circles. I'd go there for those events. But I basically kept those two sides of my world separate. It just felt like, they didn't need to be together. And also when I tried to talk to my activist friends about, hey, you guys ever thought about consciousness, or maybe we can meditate, or this or that, it was just, a lot of my activist friends were either atheist or just not generally interested in deeper pursuits. And then I would come to my consciousness circles, meditation circles, and be like, hey, have you guys ever heard of the Federal Reserve? You ever looked into 9/11? You ever thought about what they're doing to the food and all these different issues? And it was like, don't talk about it. You're gonna create, the badness if you just speak it out loud. So I'm like, okay, neither one of these groups want to talk about, each other. But for me, it was like they're two sides of the same coin. But for a couple of years, the first couple of years, I just kept it separate. And the summer of 2013, I had another shift, and there was about 3 or 4 days where I couldn't sleep, and I was just, I wasn't on drugs or anything. I was just watching documentaries and doing more research, going down another rabbit hole. And in that time period, in those couple of days, this phrase, the conscious resistance, just came to me. And what I mean by that, and when we talk about this in the books, the conscious resistance is essentially, it's the moment, the realization, the awareness, the recognition that the struggle for a more free, ethical, and just world is not only one in the sense of the physical structures and confronting and being aware of political power and corporate power, but it's also the struggle against our own internal tyrant, against our own fears, doubts, and insecurities, our own self-limiting thoughts, and that actually limit us in so many different ways. And the reason I understand that, the reason that came to me, is because that whole story I just shared with you. If you would come to me with all the information that I know now and all the topics that we're concerned with, and the things that we fear for in the world and that we want to fix and come up with solutions, if you had come to me with that information back then, I would have listened to you, I would have empathized with you, but I wouldn't have been able to join your cause or do anything because at that time I was just trying to make it through another day. I probably would have been like, man, that's fucked up, they're doing that, but I'm sorry, man, I'm just trying not to kill myself today. And with that understanding and being able to move forward and kind of reflect back, I realized that there are so many of us that are in pain, that are in trauma. And I feel very confident saying to anyone, because I know that no matter how we can present ourselves on social media or public outward appearances can seem to be, we all, in different ways, have doubts, fears, and insecurities. And some things that seem so simple or trite to us, you meet somebody and you find out that they have an insecurity about, their appearance or something, like, wow, I can't believe you even think about that. You're just, you're this awesome person. Things that seem trivial to us might be very huge and paralyzing to somebody else. So I know that we deal with these things in our own ways, and they express themselves in different ways, and some of us are better at dealing with them and processing them and rising above them. But I know that until those things are dealt with, until we're able to heal that deeper trauma and focus on the healing individually, at the same time as we're building these new institutions we want, until we're able to combine these processes, I don't think we're actually going to be able to achieve the change we want. The world that I see, where humans recognize their value, we recognize self-ownership, we recognize that we are all free, beautiful people surrounded by other free, beautiful people, and we're capable of organizing, of exchanging, and doing so many beautiful things without the need for these authoritarian structures. That's the world that I believe in. But I also recognize that a big block to that is our own limitations, the ways that we hold ourselves back. And sometimes we refer to that as our internal tyrant. That really can be the worst tyrant there is, more than a Donald Trump or any of these people outside. Our internal tyrant can be the one that really keeps us from reaching our fullest potential and keep us from building positive relationships, because those doubts, fears, and insecurities, until they're dealt with, identified, processed, and through whatever method you choose, starting that healing process, they're going to surface in one way or another. They're going to come up in your relationships. They're going to come up in your communication. They're going to come up in your life until they are eventually dealt with. or not. So that's why I focus a lot on that. That's why our work talks about both sides of this, identifying the various structures and the people and the things that we don't like that are creating problems in our world, but also focusing on how we can empower and heal ourselves. That's what the conscious resistance is about. I mentioned this earlier. Everything else I'm about to go over, now we're about to get into some practical stuff, is going to come from Manifesto of the Free Humans, the last book in the trilogy. And all the books are downloadable for free on the internet if you don't pick up one tonight. And so these books are co-written by a good friend of, I do want to say this, they're co-written by a good friend of mine, John Vibes, who's in the Maryland area just outside of Baltimore. He would have been on this whole tour with us and at least been last night, maybe some of the East Coast tour, but he's currently fighting cancer, so he's at home taking care of that. So I just want to shout out to John. He's the other half, to this team, and I'm out here just repping our stuff. So shout out to John.